A man who had been a getaway driver for an Italian mafia boss for several years was able to get away with it until he made one very big mistake. What was that mistake? Well, let's find out. Salvatore Rina, also known as Tito, was a respected mafia captain in the Sicilian Mafia, or Cosa Nostra. During his reign of terror, he made so much money that he earned the nickname the Swine. After all, if you have that much cash, you can probably afford a few golden pigs to adorn your house with. However, things were not always good times for the crime family. In 2007, their Don Bernardo Provenzano disappeared. At first, the police thought they had finally captured him after more than a decade on the run. But it turned out to be a red herring. Or maybe it was just a decoy that looked like him. We may never know. What we do know is that after the supposed death of their leader, the entire family had to go into hiding. Amongst them was Tito. His name was cleared of all criminal charges before the cops realized that he made his money by extortion, illegal gambling, and selling drugs. And because he was a well-known member of the organization, everyone had to hide their faces in court out of fear of retaliation. So why did they need to clear his name in the first place? Well, because there was a mountain of evidence linking him to the crimes. But it wasn't just any old evidence. It was hard evidence. You know the type, the kind that sticks to you like glue. In other words, DNA evidence. And when DNA evidence links you to a crime scene, you don't really need any further proof that you committed the crime. That's because it has a success rate of 100%. Even if you're 100% innocent, you won't be found innocent. You might as well confess right away. However, during the trial, the prosecution couldn't bring up this damning evidence. Why? Because it was contaminated. This is a rarity in Italy, but sometimes the courts will throw out DNA evidence if it wasn't collected correctly. In this case, the police had gotten a sample from a car that was stolen from the crime scene. They compared it to some of Tito's hair, which he gave willingly, thinking it would clear his name. But the DNA profiles didn't match. So the judge ruled that he could not be connected to the crime and let him go. Now, that doesn't mean that the real criminal got away, but it does mean that the police had nothing to go on at that point. And that was good news for the rest of the mafia members who went into hiding. So where did Tito go? Surprisingly, he didn't leave the country. Instead, he moved to another city in Italy. Specifically moved to Pareto Lake near Milan, where he bought a boat and lived on it full-time. You know, just a normal life like the rest of us. The police didn't suspect a thing because they had no reason to look for him. After all, he wasn't wanted. Besides, why would a mafia captain buy a boat and live on a lake? It wasn't like it was the Mediterranean Sea where boats are common. It was fresh water. Tito changed his appearance to avoid being recognized and used false documents under the name Bruno Testoni. He even sold his expensive cars, thinking that the risk of someone recognizing them was too great. But the police ended up finding the cars anyway, along with tons of weapons. But none of these things provided enough evidence to bring him back in for questioning. The cops needed something better, something that would guarantee a conviction and send him down for a long stretch. Little did they know that he was already on the radar of the authorities. After all, how does one go about living on a boat in a lake without drawing attention to himself? You can't. Someone reported him. That someone happened to be a former mafioso named Santino de Matteo. Unlike Tito, he decided to turn state's witness and rat out the rest of his former friends. So the police knew that Tito had moved to the lake. What they didn't know was where on the lake. But with the help of the informant, they soon found out. In fact, the informant had been keeping tabs on him the whole time, so the police knew exactly where to find him. One night, around 10 p.m., a patrol boat spotted the vessel in question. Officers approached the boat and introduced themselves. They then asked for permission to search the vessel. They told Tito that it was a routine check, but he knew that there was more to it than that. However, he stood his ground and refused to allow them to inspect the boat. The officers left shortly thereafter, but they returned 15 minutes later with a warrant. Now, there was no way he was going to stop them. The police searched the boat and found 3 guns, a bulletproof vest, and 300,000 euros in cash. While none of these things directly linked him to the crime, they certainly didn't help his case. And the police suspected that he was still involved in illegal activities, albeit from a safe distance. If they could nail him for weapons possession or money laundering, they might have a chance at putting him away for a while. The only problem was he hadn't actually done anything yet. He was simply suspected of continuing his criminal activity. That meant that they needed evidence of a crime in progress. And that's when they decided to install a wiretap on the boat. If he was talking about illegal activities, they would be sure to catch it. Unfortunately for Tito, he seemed to think that criminals shouldn't use cell phones. Maybe he was worried about another DNA slip-up. Either way, the police listened to every conversation that took place on the boat. For days, nothing incriminating came of it. Finally, the police began to lose hope. Then, suddenly, one of the conversations caught the attention of the officers. One day, they heard someone on the phone discussing a plan to steal some rare and valuable wine from a nearby winery. This was the opportunity that the police had been waiting for. They had probable cause to arrest Tito, search the boat again, and see if he had anything to do with the theft. So far, he had shown no signs that he was involved in the conversation, but they needed to make sure that he wasn't lying low and keeping quiet. And that's when they made the biggest mistake of the investigation. When they arrested him, they didn't put him in a police cruiser. Instead, they put him in a plain unmarked car. Why? We don't know. But we're guessing that they didn't want anyone to know that they had arrested a mafia captain. But whatever the reason, it ended up costing them the case. As soon as they got him in the car and drove off, Tito recognized that it wasn't a police cruiser. He then proceeded to beat the living daylight out of the officers inside. And when the police finally realized that the men in the car weren't officers, it was too late. Tito had vanished. Only thing they found was his clothes, which was a little disappointing. At least they could have gotten DNA from the car. But instead, they got DNA from his clothes. Luckily, they still had the wiretapped conversations as evidence. But when they brought the case to court, the judge said that the confessions didn't prove that Tito was the mastermind behind the plot. All they showed was that he was a mere participant. He could have just been hired to drive the getaway car. After all, they never caught the person on the other end of the line. They didn't even know if that person existed or if Tito was just talking to himself. As such, the judge ruled in favor of Tito, saying that the prosecution had failed to provide sufficient evidence. That's right. A mafia captain who beat 2 police officers to a pulp was set free due to a lack of evidence. It seems like the justice system can be quite lenient at times, especially when dealing with people who seem to be above the law. The weird part is that the police had him in their clutches twice, but both times they let him go. First, they let him go because they couldn't connect him to the crime through DNA. Then they let him go because they didn't gather enough evidence to convict him. Had they taken either of those steps differently, they would have put the guy away for a very long time. That's just how things go sometimes. Do you agree with the verdict? Let us know in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.